Hey, so as we've spoken about, I am going to be going over some user interface stuff today. Hopefully looking at the setting up of the canvas, the sizes and orientations, ensuring the position is always going to be good regardless of where certain elements are going to be. Making stuff stay in the correct place as well, because obviously when you go in from, let's say, 4.3 or 16.9 resolutions, you're going to find that things are going to be bouncing around left, right and centre. And obviously you might want to have a different user interface on a mobile or a desktop game or a console game at this point. We're going to look at opening and closing certain panels and things like that, and testing it all to make sure it all works good and just getting things ready. So as I've explained, these videos are going to be pretty nasty. You may hear dogs barking in the background, you may hear people shouting at me, all part of my standard life, it's not a big deal. Just ignore that. It does me a favour by not having to edit it, and it does you a favour because you get to see how things can go wrong when you're developing a user interface. So for this video, I'm going to be using a game I'm working on. Some of you have already seen it, some of you may have not. It's this game. I need to develop a title screen for it anyway. I've already put that together, and it looks like this. We're going to have a simple play button. We're going to have links to Twitter and Facebook, obviously. We're going to have an options button and a credits button. I haven't put together the panels and things like that, but the concept is always going to be relatively straightforward and the same. So, I have my game, and I have one user interface already, but it's very, very minimal, and we don't care about that. So we're just going to create a new user interface, and it's going to be a canvas, and we're going to rename this to title screen, and inside that we're going to create a new image. You could create a panel, but I don't like panel. It's much more straightforward just to use an image. There is very little difference apart from the name, really, and what you're going to be using it for, so it's kind of weird why they've done that. I'm also going to drag my assets in. Obviously you're going to have your own assets. I've created my folder already, part of my Blue Peter preparation. Here's something I made earlier. So graphics, I'm going to create a UI folder within the graphics folder. Did I already have one? No. And we're just going to drag all these in. They're all PNGs, apart from the background, which doesn't have a transparent background, for obvious reasons, because it's full image. All these are obviously transparent. You shouldn't have to do anything to them to use them. First off then, so this image, first off we should look at the sizes and orientations. So we've created a canvas. One of the big questions I get quite often, actually, is that why is the canvas so big in comparison to the game? Which, if you scroll in, this is the background for the game, and you can see that when I press play, it's going to go pretty full screen. Ignore the UI square. The UI, obviously, in 3D games and stuff, the UI isn't relative to the game. So if you were going to make a game like, let's say, Vice City? How old am I? Grand Theft Auto 5. I don't even know if it's got another name. It's huge. It's miles wide and miles deep and miles high, probably. The canvas doesn't have a position within that user interface. So you have this canvas here, which just basically slots onto the front of the camera. So if you have a camera that is looking down here, when you press play, the camera will pop out and it will snap onto the camera. The canvas, sorry, will snap onto the camera. And if you have a 3D game, regardless of where your camera is, or even if you're like toggling through cameras, the interface that you want is going to be popping around these. So the point I'm making here is that don't worry about whether you can't see a game or not, just focus on what you're meant to be doing, and in this case it is going to be dealing with our user interface, our title screen. So the first thing we're going to look at over here is the constant pixel size. There's a lot of stuff you can do with the canvas, and I would claim to know everything about it, but the canvas scaler seems to be, in my opinion, the most important thing you need to be dealing with. If you change the constant pixel size to scale with screen size, and I tend to set it to 1920 by 1080, and change the match width and height to 0.5, so it's directly in the center. You can fiddle around with this, totally not worth it though. They all do very, very similar stuff, but if you set it to 1080, expanding has no real benefit unless people like playing on a 4K monitor. If you're developing a game in 4K, you probably don't want to be doing much tutorials anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. Shrinking does the same thing, but match with height is perfect. You don't need to worry about anything else. Once you've done that, if I press play again, this is our awesome memory, you'll see that the square is slightly smaller, because the square is kept the same size, except our canvas is way bigger. So when it's slotting onto the camera, it's obviously got its own thing going on. So we'll select this image, we will call it background, and we will drag in our background image. And again, you know, it's not done it much apart from just fill the square. Nothing, right? Now, what you could do, you could potentially try and scale it manually, which is pretty lame. You know, you could do it. That's not a debate, but it's far easier if you take this button up here and go to this, which scales it like justified both top and bottom. You'll see that you get these different numbers here. Settle these to 0 and you will guarantee that it will fill the interface 100%. So it's going to be perfectly stretched. You can add margins to this, so let's say you have 10 on the left, 100 on the right, and 50 on the bottom. It will keep that sort of orientation as much as you like. So you can see here still the rest of the game, but no, it's fine. You know, we want it full screen, so 0, 0, 0, 0. Now, one thing I kind of skimmed on there is these numbers here. Let's say you were making a game that is going to be portrait, like a quiz game or something. You can invert these, so you've got 1080 by 1920. You'll see that hasn't really changed too much, because basically if I delete this image real quick, you're not going to see much because I haven't really changed anything. But if I come in here, I can change the, this probably should have been in the testing area, but if I come in here and add a new one, I can change this to 9 by 16. Yep. So you can see now, like that thing. There we go. 960. Okay, that's what I meant to do the first time. So now we have a portrait mode. It's the exact same scenario, except it's 1080 by 1920, and it's scaled 0.5, except we have a portrait mode. We can toggle this back and forth, and you see that it's changing things as we need to. That is kind of like one of the more important things to be testing in regards to your game and so on, is if... Oh, yeah, I zoomed in way too much apparently. There you go. If we are going to be making a portrait game, we want to be having our user interface as a portrait from the very start. It's the most important thing you should be doing, and it goes without saying, I guess. I've seen a lot of games lately where the user interface just looks so small in comparison to the game, and it's a lot of effort to try and do it the opposite way around, where you make the game first time, make the user interface first, and then try and fix it later on, because everything scales like weirdly, and you know, it's just effort. So my advice is get this scaling the right size straight away and build on that. So again, I'm going to create another image. I'm going to get the background back in, and I'm going to come up here and justify it left and right. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Now, as I say, so where are we? Yep, perfecto. So again, I'm going to be trying to replicate this. Oh, that's not what I was meant. Oh no. So what I'm gonna do now is yes, I'm going to get the play buttons in. So one thing you want to be sure of is to make sure that you're nesting everything decently. We'll talk more about nesting shortly, but it's very important that you basically, if you're going to create a background, put everything within the background, and if you're going to have, let's say, a menu on the left and a menu on the right, make sure that you have those nested too. So you'll have like a panel on the left, a panel on the right, and have all your buttons inside of that. So I mean, maybe that goes without saying, but I see a lot of people that don't do that too, and it basically just makes things harder for them. Text on buttons, if you're going to do that, that's fine. I'm not really a fan of it now, simply because of language barriers. If you're going to have lots of buttons, that means you have to have lots of translations, and it just becomes effort, basically. So I would avoid that and try and go for things like this, which people know what it is, and even if they have to click it to find out, it's their problem, right? So everything that I've saved is from scale. Basically, when you copy this, so what I've done is I've copied it, made a new image here, and saved it as the size that it is. So it's a real size, it's going to be perfect scale. So then when I bring it in here, all I have to do is click Set Native Size, and you'll see that it pops roughly to about the right size that I need it. So this just ensures then that it's gonna look good. It's all gonna scale well. Everything here is, in theory, the right size. It's just a matter of getting it in the right position, you know? So let's drag this over a bit, and that one's done. And we'll create another button. In fact, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my chicken man in. And again, so set native size. Move it to the left a little. Now we can rotate it. I'm going to start copying and pasting these buttons because I want them to try and stay all roughly the same size. So we've got phase it up and set native size. Corner. Set native size. All four of these and I'll move them up so they're, in theory, even. And move this guy in a little. Yeah, that'll do, huh? So each of these now don't have text, they don't really do anything. Kind of important, make sure you name everything correctly, because if you ever need to associate it with code, probably less that you relate to it easily now. What popped into my head there about naming conventions. Camel case, I guess, leading with the first capital letter. Always call it a button, so you know it's a button. Always call it an image, so you know it's an image. Just keep it nice and simple and pretty obvious, so that there's never any confusion. So you'll notice that some of these are scaling kind of weird. It won't make too much of a difference. It's pretty finicky. Make sure you. I like to make sure that everything says 1, 1, 1 and so on. Don't think it really makes too much of a difference, but yeah, why not, right? So when we press play now, should get a decent look at what it looks like. And you'll see that hovering over these things, you'll get a slight tint, I guess, which is pretty cool. You can change these if you wanted to. You can select everything at once as well. So let's say I want to make it go, I don't know, slightly blue. Oh, nope, that's the colour, we'll undo that. Down here, sorry, in the button section. So everything's selected. We've got the highlight colour here. So, I don't know. See how that looks. There we go, it's pretty cool. Kind of matches with the blue background. And it's pogo stick, ironically, so that's cool. You can notice that I've got like a shade on these buttons. The way in which the highlight color works is that it'll turn the whole color, the whole image that color. Sorry. So if you've got, let's say, stripes, it should adopt the stripes and make those stripes kind of a cool pattern. You can also do cool things with masking and things like that. So it's pretty nice. It's pretty cool. Now, what we'll look at now is how this works, like how this is going to work in 4x3, how it's going to work in 16x10 and things like that. So if you start toggling between, let's say, 16x10, you can see it looks pretty nasty. Things have gone pretty weird. 16x10 landscape, you can see I'm starting to get buttons cut out. Where are we? 4x3. That's not too bad, but you can see that things aren't really, really working out too well. Before we make any changes, kind of important, you have to go back to 16x9. Always make the changes in the resolution that you've designed your user interface for. And if you start making changes, let's say 4x3 for instance, let's do it just because we're rebels, I guess. Crazy people doing crazy things. You can see that the button's already hanging out. So we'll take the credits and the options, we'll move it out, and then change it back to 16x9. No, it's just totally naffed it up, So if we just undo that, yeah, good. So always make changes in the resolution you're designing it for, and just make sure it kind of works for everything else. It's the best you can do, really, I think. So, first off, we are going to look at what should we fix first? What was really that bad? 16x10. Let's make sure that these guys stay inside of the bounds. If we fix that correctly, it should be good for pretty much every resolution. So first thing we're going to do is, let's say we're going to get the bottom corner, and instead of where it's at right now, as you can see up top right here, we've got the centering in the middle and the anchors and so on. If we just select one of them, credits button, we can click this and we can anchor it to the bottom right hand corner. So then wherever that moves, it's always going to be relative to that corner. We can do the exact same thing with options. And let's see if that makes much of a difference here. So 4x3, and you can see that it's still tight in the corner. The play button's right in the center, and our crazy dude's doing fine over here. So back to 16x9. And we'll do the same with Twitter and Facebook, except we'll do it relative to the bottom left hand corner. Press and play, a tad too early. And then we do 4x3. And you can see that things are starting to scale down as well. How's that looking? 16x10. Well, you can see that it's working here, but this game never really played portrait, so it wouldn't be the case. 16x10 trend, 16x10 landscape. And again, everything will still play as normal. What I do want to do is raise these two up a little bit, because there's too much of a gap at the bottom. So, credits. So if we want to, let's say the play button, for instance, the play button is straightforward. If we want to keep that in the same position, it's always going to be in the center. So it's right in the center of the screen, it's always going to be there. If we want, let's say, this dude to stay relative to the right, we can, he will, because that's what we've given him. But for instance, let's say if I come here and I want to put him behind the play button slightly. I did that, by the way, by rearranging the order in the hierarchy. Basically, the higher they are to the top, the further the back they are, the lower they are to the bottom, the closer to the front they are. Relatively straightforward. But that doesn't work for nests, so let's say if I was to put the play button inside the chicken, the play is always going to be towards the front. Okay? So, if we want him to stay there, he should stay there by rights. Like, doesn't matter what scale we go into, he should be pretty tight behind the play button, which actually looked pretty nice, to be fair. So I think I'm just going to leave him there. Let's have a look at this. So you can see he's not really budging anywhere. But now let's say I wanted to have him tight to the left hand side. you can do the exact same thing, except this time just anchor it to the left, just like with the normal buttons, and he should keep his position there now, rather than, he'll still move left, but he's not going to move left like dramatically. Move right even. There we go. See, so he's not really changing height so much or anything either. Now, what if I want to, I don't know if you can see my mouse twitching every now and again, it's pretty crazy. Let's say I want to make it so that the chicken is always going to stay full height. We can do that by basically clicking this box over here, and you can see that you've got all these settings here. So you've got the stretch, you've got this one which you use for full screen, but this one here, just below where 7 would be on a keypad, if you can't see my mouse, you can see that it's left aligned with the red line, but we're going to focus the scaling to height. Okay, so if we select that one and then we look at, let's say, some portrait, you'll see that our dude is scaling way up. So for instance, if you wanted to have, let's say, a navigation bar on the left hand side and you wanted it to be the full height regardless of what scale or resolution or whatever, you could pitch it to the left so that then you could assign the width and things like that. You could also set the anchors so that they're going to be on the left hand side, but then you can also stretch it so that it's always going to remain full height. There's tons of benefits to doing that. Obviously you've got things like if you can have like selection boxes or scroll bars or anything like that, that's always the way to do that. So obviously I'm going to change that back, and again, oh sorry, that would have been a good one. So we'll change this back to some crazy resolution, right? And then we will change this back to sticking left, and you'll see that when I go back to 16:9 it should be, there we go, see, and that's why you should always go back to 16:9 rather than just fiddling it about in random resolutions. Otherwise you'll end up with chaotic stuff like that, and then you have to figure out what went wrong and so on, so on, so on. But luckily none of them. If you really wanted to be sure that you weren't going to lose scales like that, there's a preserve aspect button too, just here. So not only will it keep to the native size, it will keep it, it'll keep it square. So if you have it, let's say 3x4 in scale, it's always going to remain 3x4. So making stuff stay, we've done that. Opening and closing. Okay, so now that we've got all this stuff, I'm gonna get rid of the background a little, and inside the title screen I'm going to create a panel. This panel already adopts the full width, full height and everything, but I mean, okay, in fact I'm going to backtrack and I'm going to say delete the panel, and I'm going to create an image. Purely because, like I say, I don't really like panels. I don't see the benefit. Images just do the exact same job, except they're honest about it, basically. I'm going to scale this to pretty high, pretty wide, and I'm going to make it black, like my soul, and we're going to move it into the center here. And I mean, you could, okay, we'll come to that in a second. I'm going to call this options, and inside this I'm going to text, so UI with a text. You see it's absolutely huge, that's fine. We can fix that by going to this section here, and just like where I was talking about the chicken and having the height right and things like that, I'm going to go with the width this time. So we've got our width, and the left I'm going to make it 30. Not too much. 3 is good apparently. And I'm going to do 3 right, and height I'm going to do 5. No, 10. So 10 is the actual height, but the real height, I'm going to make it on top here. So, in here, options, make it white, and the text is vanished. Why? Because the horizontal will go low and the vertical has gone into weird settings. So just throw these in here. And that looks horrendous, and the reason for that is that it is adopting some weird settings. The reason for that will be because of the options panel. Now, as you can see, the options panel has 8.3 by 8.3, well, 9.8 scale. You want to keep that always to 1. And the reason for that is when anything gets scaled up, let's say let's say you scale a car, for instance, and you're in the driver's seat. In theory, you should scale up too, except like the speedometer and things like that, all the numbers are going to have to scale too. And because they started off so small, all the basically the text and the images and things like that, they're going to scale up and they're going to buff up big time, and they're just going to look horrendous. So we're going to jump this back to 1 and 1, and instead of scaling it that way, we're just going to scale it with numbers here. So I mean, you can, I don't know, you can take a guess. You know it's 1920 wide, so let's say we'll go with 500. And the height we know is 1080, so we'll go with 900. Okay, we'll go with 1000 instead, and we'll just jump the width up to 750. And now you can see how small the options is, the writing, and even its positions changed and everything. So instead of having 3 to the left, 30, which is what I kind of wanted to do in the first place, except I screwed it up. And the height is going to be 100. And we're just going to drag this up to the top, and we're going to make the text way bigger, 50. And you can see how crisp it is now. It's perfect. But again, if you were dealing with, let's say, 4x3 at 800 by 600 resolution, you can just imagine how, let's say, Wolfenstein 3D, the text is going to look and things like that. So there we go. So we've got our options. We could, like, I don't know, we could add some text in here, but there's no real need to help that one. Copy paste. So we've got that. And we could just assume that these are like different options or something. Who really cares at this point? Remember, good naming conventions. So options heading, capital H, and then we're just going to call these options. Bam, done. Text doesn't really matter so much because obviously it's going to change per thing, per game and per idea and so on and so on. So as long as you can get the general idea, it'll be grand. So in here, the nicest, classiest way to have panels, in my opinion, I used to code them in, but it's overrated, it's a waste of time. You can totally skip by all that stuff. So if you just click this tick up here, that'll disable it. And if we open our background section again, and we go to the options button, instead of having functions for opening and closing and things like that, we can just have a click event. So you click that plus and it'll give you a click event. We can then drag our options panel into that, and in the function section we can go into game object and set active, boom. And then you can turn on or off regardless of what you want to do. So let's say you want it to be disabled, you'd leave it as is. If you want it to be enabled, you can just tick it. So then when we run this, we should get, boom, we've got a nice little options thing. Now it's smart, so every time you click this, it's just going to open it again. It doesn't really care, you know. What you could do is, if you wanted to have, let's say, a really smart system, you could have it so that every time you click the button, it would open the thing that you want to be opened but close everything else. So for instance, we'll just duplicate this real quick and we will call this credits, and if we just turn it on and we call this credits, and I'll need to obviously name this credits so we can tell the difference. That'll do. Now we can disable this again, and we go to the credits button, and we'll add another event, and this time we'll enable the credits, set active, cool, and we'll turn it on. But at the same time, I want to add another one, and I want to be sure to turn options off. So that's credits on, options off. And now we'll go into the options button. We'll do the exact same thing, but for the credits, except we'll turn that off. Now obviously it's not going to make that much of a difference, because if they're off, they're off. You know, it's not a huge deal. But when it comes to, let's say, toggling between two different panels, it's going to work good. So obviously that does no difference. Credits, options, credits, options, credit, options. So that's cool. But what if we want to close it now? So we'll go to options, and we will delete the bottom options, and we will add a button. And again, same way that we did it earlier, we're going to have this 500 wide, and 400. Oh, jeez. Behind. Almost swore on TV, huh? Why would that be? We'll have this close button. And just the same, we're going to add an event here. And this time we are going to drag the options panel in. And just again, no big issue, turn it to false. So press play. And you'll see that that closes it and that opens it. Now, as I say, if we click that and then click this one, it changes, but then we don't have a close button. But it just shows that it's a smooth way of doing it. There's very little code involved. It's very simple. Unity's going to handle everything, and it's one less bit of code that you have to run and manage with. You know? So let's just copy this and get inside the credits. Disable that. Should be in the right place. And once more, we're just going to come over here. And this time we just need to drag the credits in. So now that we have, in theory, half decent user interface on the go, we should look at how these panels are going to be reflected when we look at the bigger picture. Like when we're going to look at the full game, how's it going to be? So, what are we at? 31 minutes. Okay, so 16 by 9, we know it works pretty decently. Close them, we can open them. Cool. What about 3 by 2? So 3 by 2, we've still got these guys in position. And how does it look? It's okay. Still in a pretty good position. You can see the text is slowly getting smaller, I think. Let's try. Well, that's just going to be a disaster here, but it's fine. About 400 by 480. Pretty nice. Everything seems to be in its place. No real issues. Pretty cool. And just keep running through that. Keep doing it over and over again, and there is no issues. I don't know whether you've looked at scripting buttons, but I mean, since we're only, what, 32 minutes in, may as well just nip through that real quick, I guess. So, okay, so you've got user interface. You should always make a script that will handle everything if you can. So, I'm going to create a script called title screen script. Again, naming convention, call it what it is so you don't get confused later on. It's just the best way to do it, in my opinion. And Visual Studio just opened and didn't even open the script, so that's cool. Drag this straight onto title screen, so then your title screen should have a title screen script, and it just gets easy to maintain that way. So we will create a function called void pressed play, and what we're going to do with that is, because I have my user interface in my game scene, so I don't have to I don't have to change scenes, I don't have to do anything fantastic. I just have to basically hide my title screen or disable it, which I know that's going against what I said earlier, because in theory I could just take the play button and disable the whole object, but tutorial says we're pressing play, you know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a button up top, but before I can do that I have to basically access user interface files, so user interface code even, so using Unity Engine.ui, and then that'll give me access to specific things that we need. While it's great, it just means it's not being used, but if for instance I go in here and I write button hello, you'll see that it goes white. But then if I delete this, button goes white again, and now it's got a red line because it can't be used. It doesn't know what button is. So you have to have that for any sort of user interface work. So what was I going to do? Button, yeah, so canvas, there we go. So canvas, title screen. And in order to get a proper glimpse of that, we'll have to make it public, so everyone can see it. And in press play, we're just going to do title screen dot set active. Oh, it's because it's canvas. Yes, sorry. Basically, game objects and components have different properties. What I'm trying to reference is the canvas here. The canvas is this. And while the whole thing is a canvas, the code thinks that canvas is this element here, and nothing more than that. Whereas the title screen is actually a full game object. So I could go ahead and do the canvas section and do title screen dot enable. Yeah, enable equals false. So that whenever I press play, the title screen is disabled. That's one way of doing it. I'll show you real quick and we can change it around. So I'll go back into my background. The play button, and then basically I'll add an event, and I will drag the title screen over back in, just like we did with the other buttons and stuff. Except this time, instead of going to game object, we can go into our title screen script, and you should see that we have okay. I was thinking this as I was writing it. As you can see, basically we do not have it here. It is not there at all. Click play screen or play button or something like that. It's not in that list at all. The reason for that is it can only find public functions. So you have to make it a public function. Save it again, and just like magic, you'll see that it appears. Eventually, it will appear. I'm certain of it. Oh. There we go. Press play. What I tend to do, which I clearly just didn't do, is I tend to call everything buttons rather, clicked, so that when you are looking for it as a button, you can find it within the C section. In the C section. That's fun. Right there. So you'll see now that there's no other options like the other buttons. But when you click that, it will run this code, which in turn will disable the title screen. But the last thing we need to do is come back to this title screen, and we need to drag itself into the script over here. And then when we press play, we should just like that. So as I was saying about having it slightly different, instead of doing enable, you can have it set active. And because, as I say, this won't work with the canvas, so you'll have to change this to game object. And now this will do the exact same thing, except now the whole canvas will be disabled. I say whole canvas, the whole game object, sorry, will be disabled. I don't really know how much difference it makes, I guess. It's nicer, I guess, to have everything disabled so there's not weird stuff going on in the background, because while the canvas is disabled, you still have all this stuff going on, you know, so disabling the full element may be better, especially on like older phones and things like that, but same job. It really doesn't really make that much difference, especially this thing. And at the end of the day, it's such a small thing. Who really cares? So as you see, retry takes us back and reloads the whole scene, which you probably shouldn't do, to be fair. But yeah, that's a different issue entirely. So we'll, I guess we can leave it there for now. There's not really much more I can do outside of, I don't know. We could add sound effects if another video is warranted. We could add sound effects. I know that one of my pals wants like list boxes or scroll boxes and things like that done. But I hope that covers the basics of the stuff that we spoke about. And if you do have any questions, just get in touch. Doodles.